I also think that when it comes to entrepreneurship, like one thing that I want to make really clear is that this is something that I've been doing for a decade at this point. This business, of course, it's had different kind of iterations, and a business will always grow and evolve as you grow and evolve as circumstances change. I mean, from where I started this business when I was, 25 versus now 34, it's like so completely different life stages, different things happening in my life, different circumstances. And I do think that there is a component of we go out into the entrepreneurial space, and all of these people are trying to tell you, like, here's how you're going to blow up overnight. Here's how, you're going to go viral. Here's how you're going to, be the next big thing instantly. And I do think there's just a component of, as cliche as it sounds, not giving up and just sticking with it, like chipping away. I think of entrepreneurship as kind of like building a house. You want to start with like the fun stuff, like the interior design and, what light fixture you're going to hang in your kitchen. But really, you just have to show up every day and start laying bricks.
Welcome to another episode of the Health Coach Academy podcast. I'm your host, Omar Cumberbatch of OmarCumberbatch.com. Happy New Year. I'm so excited to just take another year of this wonderful journey with all of you. And I'm really excited to get a little bit of a selfish start to this new year. And I have an amazing guest that is going to kick us off for this year. And I'm really excited to share her because I think you might know her. I mean, Kelly Smith is killing it out there. She's the founder of Yoga for You, and she has the top 0.1 ranked podcast, Mindful in Minutes Meditation, with over 500,000 monthly downloads. She is absolutely crushing it. And I said, she is someone who I selfishly am excited to share with you because, I mean, she's just doing an amazing job out there. And just her podcast alone, 500,000 monthly downloads is a feat that is extraordinary. And she's just continuously growing it. And I'm really excited to just get to pick her brain in the podcast space. It's really nuts. And yeah, so she's out there just doing so wonderfully. And I'm excited to get to pick her brain, not only on the podcast, but her journey. She has a very similar journey to a lot of us out there who are just finding our way, not necessarily having a tremendous business acumen to start out in our journey, but just developing it over time and really establishing herself. So yes, please enjoy this episode. And as always, jump on and leave a rating and review on iTunes. This is how I continuously get awesome guests like Kelly. Also, like I have mentioned in prior episodes, the book is almost out. I can't wait to share that podcast about that journey. Very interesting. So many, oh boy, I want to say challenges, but they weren't really challenges to the extent that I would say would deter anybody from actually doing it. But when you just set forth on a journey, you just never know what's going to come up and derail some of your, initial observations and thoughts about like timelines and stuff like that. But yeah, no, listen, it's been fun, and I'm hoping that. Well, I'm knowing that this book is going to help a lot of people. And again, I am still offering that opportunity to get a free copy of that book in exchange for a review when it comes out. And yeah, just hit me up on Omar at OmarCumberbatch.com and I'll get that over to you. So listen again, everybody, Happy New Year. Let's get this new year started right. Let's jump into the show with Kelly Smith. Hey, Kelly, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am so good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I'm so excited to share you with my audience because you're doing tremendous things out there. And I know it wasn't always like that. So I always unfortunately, to kind of benefit from some of the things that you've overcome, our audience is always interested in just getting past some of these hurdles that we all do as entrepreneurs or newly, created entrepreneurs in this space. So I want to give you an opportunity to just let the audience know a little bit about you, your origin story, and how you got into this particular field.
Sure. So I'm Kelly Smith. I'm a yoga and meditation teacher. I'm the founder of Yoga for You, which is a location independent yoga and meditation school. And then I'm the host of the podcasts Mindful in Minutes and Meditation Mama. And I've written a couple of books on like meditation and the family, meditation and anxiety. And I started doing all of this like over a decade ago. And I'm really passionate about what we're going to be speaking about today because like over a decade ago, I remember my heart wanting to really teach yoga. But we were single income for my family. My husband was still in school. And so everything kind of fell on me to make things work. So I remember working all of these other jobs to like pay the bills. And then I'd be building my business and all the little pockets of time here and there that I could find. And that really like, you know, fed my soul in a way. And I started to teach yoga 10 years ago, and it started with like one class. I had this Friday night class, and they were so sweet. I love them. They're near and dear to my heart. And it slowly started to grow and snowball. And over time, that one class grew into more classes and more classes. That turned into a yoga studio, which then ended up being sold when we moved. And that turned into a location independent business, which is what I do now, where I go places and do trainings or lead retreats kind of all over, podcasting, doing all the things without having a physical location. And I feel especially fortunate because I've been able to kind of release all of those kind of extra jobs and made my side hustle my full-time job to the point where I'm now able to take my full-time job and intentionally scale it back to now part-time once again, so I can be both a mom and an entrepreneur at the same time, without having to kind of financially cripple myself at the same time.
Wow, no, that's amazing, and it's really good to hear when a person's able to finally overcome that and get out of their main gig and make it. Well, I should say, get out of a full-time gig and then your side hustle became your main thing. So I know that you struggled with the starving artist mentality. I think a lot of health coaches do deal with that. A lot of entrepreneurs in general, right? That we not only devalue our services, but we have really a difficult struggle making it something that we get paid for what we're actually worth. So can you talk about what that mentality is exactly and how it affected you specifically?
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest things that I've had to overcome in my journey. And the biggest piece for me, well, one of the components I think is when I started, I was younger. I was in my mid 20s versus my mid 30s now. And I think I was really one worried about what people think, which I think by the time I hit 30, I kind of cared a little bit less about what people were thinking, but I was really worried about it at the time. And I remember there was a point where I was right on that kind of the precipice of, do I take the leap and just go into this like full time? My trainings were doing well, my retreats were doing well. And then March of 2020 happened. We all know it, we remember it well. And that actually ended up being a blessing in disguise for my podcast. So a bunch of people that were at home and anxious and scared were looking for guided meditations, which is what I do on my podcast. And I'd been doing it for several years at this point, and they all started looking for what I had been making for years. And so then this opportunity popped up to really start monetizing my podcast by running ads on it. And I ran my first few ads, and I got an email from one of my listeners expressing how disgusted they were that I had run an ad on my show. And they were saying that if I really cared, if I really wanted people to, feel better, if I was actually in it for the right reasons, I would never accept $1 for what I did. And that stuck with me for a really long time. I think because I care about what I do so much, as I'm sure all of your listeners do. When you create this heart-centered business, when you do something because you want to help improve people's lives and you're sharing what you love, you put your heart and soul into it. So when someone kind of questions your intentions, it feels like extra painful. And I held on to that for a really long time, felt very insecure about running ads on my podcast, felt very insecure about even letting people know that I was able to do this full time, because in the back of my head, I held on to those words of that if I really cared, I would never accept money for it. And that was such a struggle for me. for several years. And I think that I really did kind of develop this starving artist mentality of like, well, if I really care, I can't replace a full-time corporate salary with being a meditation teacher, then maybe I don't really care. Then maybe it doesn't mean as much to me. And that was just so hard in that moment to hear that feedback and then to internalize it so deeply. But I'm curious, Omar, if you've had any similar experiences.
I have, but what I just wrote down, I'm writing down little notes as we speak. It's interesting that that happened to you from someone who's not even paying you, right?
You
So
know,
I get it. Like it's an ad, right? Like it's not your money. What are you complaining about? It's like I've heard because a lot of us have come into things. So, oh, why are you charging for a course or for this or for that? Like, and you're like, okay, so I understand that you don't want to pay the money and you want something free, but your circumstance is very interesting because it's not their money. You're not taking any dollars from. So what are they so upset about? Like, I find
and
that fascinating.
yeah, it is very interesting. And it was something that was actually part of when I had to come to terms with this, because after a while, I started really sort of holding myself back in a way because I was so worried about getting these, more emails and messages of people being like, you don't care, your heart's not in it. You should be disgusted with yourself. And one, I agree with you. I thought it was a little bit interesting because first of all, we all know on a podcast there's that little, forward 15-second button. Just tap it a couple of times and move on.
Yeah.
And what I ended up saying I ended up addressing this on my podcast because it came up more than once from people saying that they love the podcast until I started running ads. And to clarify, I run one ad at the beginning of every meditation. It's not during the meditation. It's like one pre-roll ad. So you can just kind of fast forward and move on. So I ended up addressing this on my show and explaining to people that I had two options, and I could either monetize my podcast and then be able to focus on it and continue to create it. Because you and I both know as podcasters, like a podcast truly is a labor of love. There's so
Mhm.
much time and effort that goes into it. And it's really tough to maintain when you're working, a full-time job outside of it. So I explained to them either I could have these advertisers basically paying me so that then I could have the time to actually create this podcast for them, or I would have to go work another job to pay my bills, and then I wouldn't have time to do the podcast.
Right.
So, and that's kind of what I ended just being like, you guys, I have bills that need to get paid, and my bills getting paid have nothing to do with how much I care about what I'm doing or how much I love meditation or my ability to kind of create these practices for you. And I also sometimes think it's a little interesting when someone gets really bent out of shape about a meditation podcast because the meditation teacher in me wants to reach out and be like, I can see that you are feeling so triggered and dysregulated. And
Yeah.
I would love to help support your nervous system to just kind of calm this down a little bit.
Oh, you
But
should
that's
have done that.
where,
You would have
oh
pissed
my
that person
gosh,
off. You would have pissed them
I
off.
it's just like, okay, we're getting a little worked up over a meditation podcast. I think we could probably use a little more meditation in our life. But I had to really look inward and recognize that one, what I'm offering is of value.
Yeah.
And I thought about this a lot because my husband works in medicine, and no one ever comes to him and says, you know what, if you really cared about making people better and feeling better, you would never get paid a dollar for what you did. Like people value the work that he does in medicine, but somehow it wasn't translating where people thought because I was teaching meditation, because I was leading yoga practices, kind of diving more into the spirituality space, that I just shouldn't ever make money doing that. And that somehow was wrong, even though I was trying to help people versus how my husband tries to help people in a more traditional sense. And no one has any issues. You go to the doctor, at least in the US, you go to the doctor, you get a bill. And
Right,
then
right.
people are like, okay, well, now I have to pay this bill. They're not like, oh, well, if they really cared, every single doctor out there would be working for free and they would never accept, a penny for what they do. And when I realized that, it really opened my eyes to, what I am offering is valuable, and you can care about what you do and want to help people and also responsibly support your family. Because at this time we were still single income and there was no other option other than me to support my family. And I had to kind of reconcile this within me that both of those things could be true at the same time, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's just weird about people, right? And I always
Mhm.
laugh at it as a fellow podcaster you could appreciate. It's even the people who leave like the negative review on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, you know how many bad podcasts I've heard and I just don't listen to them anymore, right? I don't, why do I have to go and just throw a 1 star on somebody's podcast for what? Like it's really, and again,
Yeah.
I don't know the mentality behind it, but I'm like, man, if it was that bad, you don't have to listen to it anymore. Just keep it moving. Don't give me a 1 star, but
I
you get
know.
those kinds of, things sprinkled into what you're doing, and it's you gotta have to wonder about people sometimes, just in general.
Yes, you do. And I've come to the conclusion that I think sometimes people just want to be heard or they want to feel heard or seen. And so sometimes their way of doing that is they're like, you know what? I did not like that episode. I did not like that meditation. And they have this deep desire to really just want to be seen in a way. So leaving like a scathing 1 star review is their way of doing that. And I think it often, especially when there's nothing constructive in it, I think it says more about the person leaving it than the person. Cause like you said, it's a free podcast. Like no one has to listen. No one's
Yeah.
making you sit here and like hate listen to, what we're sharing.
Yeah, I just always find it amusing. So, but yeah, no, thanks for sharing that part of it. I also want to know how you overcame it. Like, what was it? You sprinkled a little bit of it, but I also want to get in a little deeper how you actually overcame this mentality.
So it was a slow burn. And with anything, at least for me, I have to kind of sort of dip my toe in and then a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So I think it was with over time. One, I had to mostly check my own mindset because when we deeply internalize things like that email I got from a listener, it's because a piece of us thinks it's true.
Hmm.
And that's why we have such a hard time with it. Because if they would have said something that I didn't think there was a kernel of truth in, I would have been like, wow, that's kind of wild. That's a wild email. And I would have just, I call it STT, straight to trash. So that would have been,
Okay.
STT, straight to trash.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes when someone says something and it hits that nerve, it's because we do believe there's at least a little bit of truth in there. So I had to first get that awareness of like, why did that bother me so much?
Hmm.
And then what in that do I believe to be true? And I think it was that a little bit of imposter syndrome, being like, well, who am I to be out here doing what I love and, being able to pay myself a salary, doing it and sort of checking myself with this own mindset and then starting to slowly do things, slowly put myself out there, like reach out to more brands and get more advertisers on the show, offering workshops for even yoga teachers of like how to build, how to craft your next successful workshop, kind of just talking about the money thing, putting myself out there a little bit and being like, okay, it's all right. Don't panic. People are enjoying this. You're feeling fulfilled. Like you talked about money and you monetized something and nothing bad happened. And then starting to make it bigger and bigger and bigger while also continuing to do this work to kind of check my own mindset as to like, why is this so hard for me? And then over time, I think I started to really build one more confidence in who I was and what I was doing. And also start to recognize that just like I said earlier, like you can do what you love and get paid for it at the same time. And those are not opposing things. Those can align, those can live harmoniously. So it's kind of a combo of like a little bit of exposure therapy, checking my own mindset. And then when I started talking more about money, like even 5 years ago, if you would have said, hey, you want to come on my podcast and talk about money and how you make money, what you do, I'd have been like, no, I don't talk about that. I don't want to put myself out there. But I've been finding that more people appreciate the financial transparency and appreciate hearing about these things. And I think the more that we have these conversations, the better we will all be for it.
Oh no, absolutely. And you're an inspiration to all of us who are trying to do what we love and make money doing it. That, ultimately that's what we all want to do. So, thank you for sharing, this and yourself with the world in this context. So I think that's super important. I'm very curious to know if you came from an entrepreneurial family.
No, not at all. I have been
That's
graced
big.
with Yeah, I've been graced with double neurodivergence, which I
Oh,
think is kind of what makes me somewhat successful as an entrepreneur. I have ADHD and dyslexia, at least my type of entrepreneur. So learning in the traditional sense has always been tricky for me. So something that I love because even through school, I just had such a hard time learning, um, even learning how to read, just learning was hard. A traditional school system was hard for me. And I think through learning how to cope with that, I learned how to take ideas and kind of break them down into little digestible bits and sort of like reteach myself these things in a way that I could understand. And so I love to teach people kind of these things that feel big and complex, like something like meditation. It sometimes can feel like it has a high barrier to entry. It really doesn't. It's just about, kind of breaking it down, making it simple, little micro habits, things like that. I love
mhm.
teaching teachers, doing like continued ed trainings in a way that it's like, here's what you need to know. And so that's one piece of it. Also, I think I'm the right amount of spontaneous courtesy of my ADHD that I'll kind of just decide I want to do something and then I'll just go and do it. And I don't know, I've just always I think sometimes it's just like entrepreneurship is kind of in your blood in a way. No one like taught it to me, but I remember even being like when I was like young and I was like, I want to, whatever, buy this toy. And my mom would be like, okay, that toy is $20. So what's your plan to make $20? And I'd be like, I'm so glad you asked. Here's my like, you know,
Oh,
three
wow.
week plan for how I'm going to make all this money. And I think sometimes it's like it's in your blood or your brain just works that way. But entrepreneurship was never modeled for me. And I don't think it was for you either, was it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that carries its own baggage with it because you're not used to going out there and really trying to do things on your own. You're brought up in a person who has a family who gets a check every 2 weeks. That is a level of comfort that's undeniable, and entrepreneurship doesn't afford that a lot of the time. And it's, at least in the beginning, right? So it's easy to just start, dip your toes in, and run back to just getting your 9 to 5. So I definitely could appreciate that. I was curious because again, you lucked out. You beat that. That's a win in and of itself.
Yeah, and I do think there is, a component of lucking out, and I also think that when it comes to entrepreneurship, like one thing that I want to make really clear is that this is something that I've been doing for a decade at this point. This business, of course, it's had different kind of iterations, and a business will always grow and evolve as you grow and evolve as circumstances change. I mean, from where I started this business when I was, 25 versus now 34, it's like so completely different life stages, different things happening in my life, different circumstances. And I do think that there is a component of we go out into the entrepreneurial space and all of these people are trying to tell you like, here's how you're going to blow up overnight. Here's how, you're going to go viral. Here's how you're going to, be the next big thing instantly. And I do think there's just a component of, as cliche as it sounds, not giving up and just sticking with it, like chipping away. I think of entrepreneurship as kind of like building a house. You want to start with like the fun stuff, like the interior design and, what light fixture you're going to hang in your kitchen. But really, you just have to show up every day and start laying bricks. Like
Yeah.
you might have the blueprint, it might change a little bit, and I still tell myself this every day when, even though I love what I do, there's still components of what you do that you're like, that's not my favorite. But sometimes, are you feeling tired, whatever it is, I just have to remind myself, like, you just have to show up and lay some bricks.
Hmm.
And if you lay bricks, every day for even a year, your house is going to be so much farther than it was when you started. And that's not like a really like sexy thing to say, but it's kind of for me has always been true as well, is that it's just like you show up every day, even if it's just for whatever you have, 30 minutes, an hour, maybe more. And you
Hmm.
just think to yourself, I just have to start laying some bricks. Just do something because you'll never get anywhere if you don't show up and just start putting one foot in front of the other and just doing something to gain that momentum.
No, and I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense, and it's just like one step at a time. Really, one of the things that we definitely touched on the fact that
this mindset was very, very critical in you overcoming. What else did you stumble with as you started your business besides that?
Oh my gosh, everything. I mean, everything. There's been so many ups and downs and twists and turns. Like when I was first starting, I definitely had a hard time. Not a lot of people believed in what I wanted to do. They didn't think it was a good idea. They didn't think it would be successful. They thought it was kind of silly or foolish. Like they were just like, oh, so you just want to go and like stretch with people all day. And
Who
but
are these people? I'm sorry. I just want to clarify
don't
because this is
air
important.
out anyone's like dirty laundry. What I will say, so I will say my mother was incredibly supportive
Okay.
for this dream. And I think sometimes all you need is like one other person in your corner that says, I think you can do it. And that's enough. But I don't want to like, air out anybody, but I would say people who were close to me. I mean, certainly maybe we're not as close now, but even at that stage in my life, I graduated college not that long ago at this point, and I think at least I was so worried about what people thought. And you graduate college or university, and then everyone's like, oh, I got this job, oh, I got that job, oh, I got my dream job, oh, I'm moving to this place. And it's kind of like we're just trying to one up each other about like who's getting the most success out of the gate. And I just kind of felt like I just want to teach yoga.
Hmm.
And to me, that felt, again, this was a mindset thing that I had to work on for myself. But for me, that felt like it didn't add up to like these kind of amazing jobs that people were getting outside of college. And I was still kind of discovering myself, figuring out who I was, what I wanted to do. And all of that is okay, but it felt tough in the moment. But I think learning how to believe in myself, but also learning how to put my blinders on. So if other people in my life weren't as supportive of the dream or the idea, learning how to kind of tune out that noise, and just kind of focus on what felt right to me and what I was feeling pulled to do. That was a really big struggle for me. And then also kind of navigating a changing landscape. So much has changed in the last 10 years. Like my podcast, I know you've been doing this for a while as well, but my podcast, Mindful Minutes, just turned 7 years old, which for like a podcast is like geriatric. That's like
Yeah.
so many years to have a consistent podcast. And when I first started, the hardest thing about podcasting was getting people to figure out what was a podcast and how do I listen, versus if I started one today, it'd be totally different because now there's so many podcasts, so many different tools. And it's been tricky, but also interesting to like see an industry be built in real time, which was cool. We also moved a lot for my husband's career. So that was what motivated me to come completely location independent, as we were kind of moving anywhere from 3 to 1.5 years. So I knew, on any of your, coaches listening, it takes so long to build up like a strong client base in your area that every time you move, it's like you feel like you have to start over. So kind of navigating those things and just figuring out, how do I take my dream in my career and kind of fit it around what's happening in my family. And I had kids, and I'm like, well, now how do I do this? So sort of just navigating those changes, I think, has been one of the trickiest pieces of it.
Mm. Yeah, no, listen, this is a honest story, and that's basically a lot of people are dealing with the same thing. So yeah, I'm glad that you opened up the podcast discussion a little bit, because now it's my turn to get my selfish questions in. Little podcaster, and you're killing it. Like, your monthly numbers are unbelievable. What was
Oh.
it that you think propelled your numbers to get so high and your listenership to, be definitely top 1% of podcasts out there?
The thing that I felt like this was my moment, this was like my big break, as wild as it sounds, was when COVID hit. And I remember I have this thing, any podcasters listening, yourself included, I highly recommend you start a spreadsheet. Maybe you're already doing this. I call it my social tracker, but I track all of my metrics every week. So podcast downloads, Instagram followers, YouTube, like I take my, put my podcast on YouTube, things like that, YouTube subscribers, anything that I'm kind of doing on a weekly basis, I will just track the progress of it. Just put the numbers in. Don't put too much emotion in it, just collect the data. And I had been doing that for a couple of years because I started my podcast in 2017. And, I went in March of 2020, which is a really scary time. Like we were just indoors. I'd actually just found out I was pregnant and I hadn't told anyone yet. I was like 6 weeks pregnant and my husband was doing a medical residency in the ICU. And we were just, everyone was scared. Everyone was scared. And I thought at the time, my business model was doing all this traveling, doing continued ed trainings, pop-ups globally, like all over. That was my business model. It was doing well. And then all the flights were grounded. No one was traveling. I was pregnant and I was like, I think this is the end of it. Like, I don't know how I'm going to bounce back from this. And I remember just trying to go through the motions, go to fill out my numbers. And I checked those download numbers. Maybe I thought there's a glitch. I checked them like 5 times. I was maybe getting every week, maybe 3,000, maybe up to 10,000 every once in a while, like for the whole week, for the whole library. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like it's really growing. And I, in one week, had 250,000 downloads. Wow. In 1 week. I went from like an average 6,000-7,000 to 250,000 downloads in 1 week. And I kept checking because I was like, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And that's where it felt like this is it. This is my big break. Like I've been making these meditations and slowly gaining some traction, but it just so happened the thing. And so the big piece, to answer your question, one of the big pieces is consistency. Because you never know when the content you have been making and you've been creating consistently. And so I had 2 years at this point, so over 100 guided practices. Then everyone's at home trying to take care of their well-being, reduce their stress, manage their mental health. And they're just online on, Spotify or wherever going, guided meditation for anxiety. And here I have like a dozen of them I've already been making, right, for years. And so it was just there. And so they started listening. And so that's a piece, is consistency. Also, I'm, going to definitely acknowledge that this kind of once in a lifetime thing just so happened to break in my favor, which is like amazing because I don't know how I ever, I think that could have been, had that not happened, I think that could have been the end of my business, or at least the end of me doing my business full time. And so there's that. And then a big piece of it, I think, is building your community, which people talk about, but they don't really tell you how to do that. So I always try to be really open and honest with my community, not in like an overshare way, but I let them know that I'm sort of at the mercy of them when it comes to my success. Because everyone listening, I want you to think about, like, how did you stumble across your last few podcasts? Maybe one was recommended, maybe it popped up on something, but chances are someone may have recommended one to you. Someone could have said like, hey, I listened to this podcast. I'm a health coach. I love this one. You should check it out. And then you check it out and you listen to it, or someone shares an episode. We know that podcasts are mostly shared by word of mouth and recommendations. And I try to really educate my audience and let them know, like, the thing that's so important to me. And I set this intention before I sit down to record a meditation, is I'm like, may this meditation reach the people who are looking for it. And I just let my audience know that, where I'm like, hey, I am on this mission to make people feel better, to help us collectively kind of reduce our anxiety, and to find these simple practices so we don't feel like meditation has this high barrier to entry. Can you help me? And I'll be like, this is, my dream that I'm building. I have this tiny little closet down the hall that I record in. And I'm like, I'm sitting here in this little dark closet. I'm just trying to build a dream, and I educate my audience on like how they can help support me, and not only what that would mean to me, but like the power really is in their hands. And then I try to do like nice things for them. I try to listen. I say, hey, what do we want to work on? And people will be like, I want to work on nervous system stuff. I'll be like, great, let's do some nervous system work. And so that's how I really try to build community and educate my audience on how much not only they mean to me, but how much they can help to support what I'm doing. Because we all know the feeling. And like, I have my podcast that I like to listen to, like all sorts of random stuff. And like, when you love a podcast, one, you want to tell everyone about it. And also, like, you want to support them because we recognize people are doing this, like, because it's a labor of love. It's a passion project of theirs. And so I found that to be really useful. And then, yeah, I think those are the big ones. Also, talking to wonderful people like you who let me come and
Thanks.
share and, talk about my podcast. But mostly it's just educating my audience and letting them know how they can help me and asking for the help and just being like, hey, because we always say like, hey, if you love this, leave a review, leave a rating, share with a friend. But we often don't say why. And I'll tell people we live and die by the algorithm. Like the
Yeah.
more that you leave reviews, or now that you can leave comments on Spotify, like if you comment on Spotify, it might be more likely to pop up as a recommended show for someone. And I think like educating them on the why and the how is a missing piece for a lot of us.
That's interesting. I'm gonna start throwing that into my intros because yeah, no, listen,
Let
anything
people
that
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, absolutely. So listen, you've been fantastic. I want to ask you one final question. I want to just see if you have been thinking about your business maybe a year from now. Is it going to look any different? Or do you have any plans that are going forward, or are you just going to stay the course right now? Let this super nice wave that you're on continue, or do you have any other things that are on the horizon?
Well, one thing that I have really been focusing on, I spoke about it a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but I have kind of been sort of right, as you said, riding this wave. But to me, my career has felt like I feel really lucky and very privileged to be at a point where I did the hustle and I worked so hard. And one of the most exciting things that happened to me was when I was able to do this full time. And I was like, I'm doing it. This is my full time job. I'm paying myself a full time, salary. And then the next big step for me was learning how to. This was after my kids came along. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So they're like little. So the next big thing for me was how can I continue to pay myself the same amount?
Hmm.
But now I want to work part time. I've never wanted to just stay home with my kids. And I've never wanted to work full time. I've always felt a pull to do a little bit of both. So that was the next big thing for me was how can I continue to do what I'm doing and basically put in fewer of the hours in for dollars out and find a way to work a little bit more strategically, so that I don't have to sacrifice time with my family and I can still be financially responsible and contribute to my household. So I'm continuing to focus on that as I now work part-time on what I'm doing. And on the horizon, what I would like in 1 year from now, I would love to maintain the same abundance or have more. I'm not going to, say no to more,
Hmm.
but I would love to feel more organized. And I would love to really be cultivating like three big things instead of feeling like I'm trying different stuff or I constantly have to be doing new. I constantly have to be innovating. I want to move away from that. And I want to do like 3 things really well, like my podcast, my teacher trainings, and then I don't even know what the third one is yet. I haven't decided.
Hmm.
I just want to do what I'm doing better and make it bigger without having to sacrifice time with my family or take a financial hit from it. And that's where I would love 1 year from now, if we hopped on again, I would love to say, like, maybe it sounds wild to hear an entrepreneur be like, you know what, I'm working even less than I used to. But that is sort of my goal right now because I want to hold space for these 2 big parts of my life, which is doing absolutely what I love and and being the parent that I want to be for me. That's going to be different for everyone. I don't want any parents listening being like, that's what you need to do. For me, that's a sweet spot. And I imagine the question in that is how I'm doing that, which is basically, I find the most success in moving away from hours into dollars out. So I'm not doing private sessions, private clients at the moment. I'm not doing mentorships at the moment. My podcast does bring me a good amount of revenue, but something I've been finding a lot of success in is high value workshops or mini trainings.
Hmm.
And then I have a signature meditation teacher training that I continue to share. And so focusing my efforts on drawing more people to the things I've already created that I know work, that I know are high value, and just really have to focus on just bringing people to that instead of feeling like I have to roll out, do a big launch every year, do something new. That's not what I want to do. I want to just do what's established and what I know is working and is helping people, and then do it bigger.
Mm. Well, we're definitely rooting for you. I know you could do it because you
Thanks.
got it this far already. So I want to give you an opportunity to share all of what you are currently doing, like say your social media handles, your website, and anything we could keep up with that thing that you're doing and going forward. Just keep on rooting for you and keep on following all the good stuff you're pushing out.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's so kind and generous. And anyone who wants to connect, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Yoga for You Online. If there's any meditators out there, I'd love to see you over on Mindful in Minutes. Otherwise, just go to the website, yogaforyouonline.com. You'll find all the things there, trainings, books, links. Go click around, see what resonates, go down the wormhole, and hopefully I'll see you wherever it feels right.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I know you inspired the audience big time, including myself. So thanks again for taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode of the Health Coach Academy podcast. If you did, jump over to iTunes and leave a rating and or review. It goes a long way in helping get this message out to our fellow health coaches and people in our industry. Also, if you can, jump over to my website, omarcumberbatch.com, where I give out a lot of freebies, including my 5-day sugar challenge for people who are having issues with sugar. And also for health coaches, I have the book, Hidden. It's the 6 not so obvious ways to get your clients unstuck. Have a great day.